We
are
We are
cultivate.
Cultivate.
We are cultivate.
Hello and welcome to Yield Crime, the show where Maddie and I discuss the funny, strange, and obscure crimes of yesteryear every Wednesday. And joining me today is Patrick from the Cops and Writers podcast. I'd like to give him a chance to tell us a little more about himself and his show. Welcome.
Well, thank you so much, Lindsay, and thanks for having me on your awesome show, I must say.
Thank you.
My name is Patrick O'Donnell, born in Chicago. Both my parents were Irish immigrants. That, the American story, I guess, coming to America,
Sure.
where they both came from villages where they had no electricity or plumbing growing up, and they wound up in Chicago. My mom was 12 and my dad was 19 when he immigrated over. But they were both from the same little village. I mean, we could do a whole podcast on that. It's so neat how they reunited and got married, and then poof, me and my brother shows up,
Yeah.
So I spent my childhood on the south side of Chicago. And when I was a freshman in high school, we moved to rural Wisconsin, which was a complete culture shock. The town was maybe 10,000 people, and they didn't even have a McDonald's. Now, for a teenager with no McDonald's, I'm just like, oh my God, where did you move us to, Mom and Dad? This place sucks.
Where are we?
Exactly. I'm just like, oh my gosh. And I thought it would be like a bunch of like really friendly farmer folk and all this, but I didn't realize there was animosity between the Illinois and Wisconsin people. They all thought we were rich, oh, he's from Chicago, he's super rich, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, both my parents are immigrants that started out with literally nothing. That's not me,
Yep.
And, I don't own a boat. My parents don't own a boat or a vacation house or a cottage or anything, really.
Yeah.
And yeah, that was a slap in the face. And I wound up going to college at University of Wisconsin-Whitewater. I started out as a music major, and I was going to be a high school band director. And then, then through happenstance, I mean, I still love music. It's a big part of my life, but I wasn't good enough for performance. And if you're not good enough for performance, then you teach.
Mm-hmm.
And, performance, that's like the top 1% or 0.5% that's, good enough to make a living doing it.
Yep.
And, it's like, okay, I'll teach. That sounds great. But it just didn't work out. I was working full time as I was going to college full time. And the music classes were a lot of like 1 or 2 credit classes that you're taking 5 days a week. And it just didn't work out. But I also like sociology. I wound up going to sociology as a major. My minor was criminal justice. And I had the police bug since I was a little kid. That was always there too. And I'm Irish, so I don't have a lot of options. It's like, okay, I don't want to be a politician. Yuck. I don't like heights, so I don't want to be a firefighter. And I guess a cop is the only thing left, So here I am. So when I was in college, I did an internship with the Milwaukee County Sheriff's Department. I think it was my junior year. And I absolutely fell in love with it. And I'm like, oh my God, they pay you to do this? This is the best job ever. Wow. So when I got out of college, I was armed with my Bachelor of Arts in Sociology, which meant I was qualified to be a restaurant manager, and then I was selling cars. And, it took me a while to get on the job, but I got on the City of Milwaukee Police Department in 1995, January 16, 1995. I raised my right hand and took the oath and went through a 6-month academy, and then had an awesome 25-year career with the City of Milwaukee. I promoted to sergeant. I was lucky enough to be involved in a bunch of cool stuff, and I spent my entire career on the street.
Wow.
So that's me in a nutshell. And then as I was retiring or getting close to retiring, I started writing books, which is the weirdest thing ever because A, I'm dyslexic, and B, I got kicked out of college twice. I'm not a good student. I mean, If you would have told me that I was writing books like back when I was in school, I told you you're smoking something, man, because
Yeah.
I'm not going to believe you. And one of my books actually, and I found this out by accident, is in the Harvard School bookstore. I actually
Oh,
ordered it from the
really?
Harvard bookstore. I'm like, that's as close to Ivy League as I'm ever gonna get. So I have it up there on my bookshelf. I'm like, yeah, even the receipt from Harvard. I'm like, oh my god, look at me. I'm all Ivy League, and my wife is looking at me like, no, you're not. I'm like, hey, the guy's got. I could try, right? I
You
can
could
dream.
try.
Yes,
Yep.
exactly.
It's never too late to dream.
No, it isn't. So to promote the books, I started a podcast, I started a Facebook group, and I started writing some other books, and it kind of found me. It
Okay.
just through happenstance and kind of accidentally and just necessity as well. And boom, here I am on your show.
Can you tell us a little about your time with the City of Milwaukee Police? Like kind of what you mentioned that it was something that you really enjoyed and you were when you were on the beat. Can you give us an example or kind of a feel for what that was like for you at the time that you were with them?
Well, when I started, yeah, I worked late shift, which was midnight to 8 for 13 years, both as a police officer and as a sergeant. Then I worked what we called late power, which was 7 p.m. to 3 a.m. for 4 years. And then I finished my career on day shift as a
Okay.
sergeant. And my first assignment, if you're going to be writing books about police work, etc., geography is important because, we call our police stations, districts. I started at
Mhm.
District 5, where in New York, they're precincts. That's
Mhm.
precinct, 106 or whatever the case may be. So,
Yep.
just those little nuances, they're important. And readers will call you out on it, if you're making those kinds of mistakes. Anyway, I started District 5 and I didn't know Milwaukee. I was living in Madison when I took the
Okay.
test. And I was having a blast. And Madison was a real fun city, especially when you're younger. It's a cool town.
Mhm.
And life is great. I'm going there, and it's like, okay, now I'm moving to Milwaukee, and it reminded me of a little Chicago, a smaller version. The population back then was a little over 600,000, and I was used to an urban environment, and I liked that. There's a lot of cool
Mhm.
stuff going on, and it's like, okay, you're going to District 5, and I'm like, okay, it's 2920 North 4th Street. And the reason why I know that is I was on the witness stand as a rookie, and the defense attorney asked me one time, "What's the address of your district?" He was trying to discredit
Oh.
me, in front of a jury. And I'm like, "Oh, thank God I know this." I'm like, 2920 North 4th Street, zip code 53207. And he's looking, he's like, "No further questions, Your Honor." And I'm like, whew, all right, cool. So he knew I was a rookie, so he thought, I'm going to trip him up. He doesn't even know where he's going, that kind of thing.
Oh,
So
yeah.
right before we're leaving the academy, you got to go to the district station that you were assigned to.
Mhm.
And there was no GPS back then. So I got directions and I'm driving through this neighborhood and I'm like, this kind of reminds me of the bad parts of Chicago. I'm like, all right. Yeah. So I pull in the parking lot and there's barbed wire everywhere. It's all secured. And it looks like something out of a movie. The district station looks like a bunker. It's all, cement block, and the houses around the district station, half of them are boarded up, look like they were burnt down. Yeah, and I'm just like, ooh, okay, this is interesting. And I didn't realize
Yep.
it, but it was one of the most violent districts in the city, if not the country. And
Oh, wow.
I'm this is gonna be my home. And
Oh,
I'm
yeah.
like, okay. So I started there and I didn't realize it, but as a rookie cop, I thought I died and went to heaven because every night was something. Every
Mhm.
night you're in a chase. Every night there was a shooting. Every night it was nonstop action.
Yep.
And as a rookie cop trying to learn the job, I'm like, oh God, I'm in love. They're paying me to do this. Yeah, I'm like,
Mhm.
and again, it was the first job I ever had that I had 2 days off in a row and I had benefits. I thought I
Mhm.
died and went to heaven. I'm like, how are you people complaining about this? This is great. And they pay me overtime for anything over 8 hours. I'm like, wow. So I did my time on the street. And after about 6 years, I promoted to sergeant. And that's the best of both worlds where now I'm a supervisor. I'm supervising the cops on the street,
Mhm.
and I'm kind of the buffer between upper management and the boots on the ground, the cops.
Okay. Yep.
And I was required, and I was a street supervisor. Some sergeants get admin jobs, they work inside, or they go to internal affairs, or they go like to the
Mhm.
dispatch center or wherever. But my heart was on the street. That's where I just love being on the street. And I love taking care of my cops. It was almost like being a dad.
Sure.
You take, it was really cool. And the cool thing about being a sergeant was you got to go to all the interesting stuff. You were
Mhm.
required to, if there's a dead body, if there's a shooting, if there's an airplane crash. That's about the only thing I didn't go to. You know, Fires, natural disasters, floods, you name it. And, you would have to go. And if a cop was being accused of something, I would be the first one to go and interview the person that's doing the accusing, et cetera. If they used force, affecting an arrest or something like that, I would have to investigate it. I'd have to write a report about it. There was a
Mhm.
lot of weight on your shoulders, but, it was respect though, too. The cops knew that I wasn't out to get them kind of thing.
Yep. Yep.
And I know that they respected that, but, depending on how far they stepped out of lines, I had to do what I had to do. Unfortunately, I had to arrest a couple of cops, during my career, that were off duty doing idiotic stuff that it was off the rails. It's like, well, actually, it
Yep.
was on the rails. I couldn't take it off. So it's like, all right.
Yep.
So, like I said before, I was working nights for 17 years. Yeah, 17 years. And after I got my feet wet, I was in charge. We had a little gang unit that I was in charge of, and playing reindeer games with that was a ton of fun. And then I was assigned to like a violent crime task force where we spent a summer going to the worst parts of the city where like the most shootings, the most violent crime. We would go and just saturate that area, for a
Okay.
night. And we would move around. We were kind of like the Swiss Army knife. It's like, hey, we need you over here. It's like, cool. So I was one of the sergeants on that. And yeah, I just had a great career. I spent the entirety of it on the streets, supervising the cops and just interacting with the community and just having a ball, really. I mean, yes, there were some really bad times too, very sad stuff, etc. But for the most part, it's like I look back on it and I'm like, man, that was a great career.
That's awesome. Not everybody can say that, so that's cool.
Right, exactly. But, you come out and you become a broken toy, nobody gets out of it unscathed, both
Yeah.
physically and emotionally. I was
Yeah.
diagnosed with really bad PTSD. I've been through some really, horrific stuff, but that doesn't make me unique in any way, shape, or form compared to other cops that I know.
That's kind of a good segue to one of my questions, which is there any particular case or incident that you were either part of as an officer on the ground or as a sergeant that's kind of stuck with you, even however many years after you've retired?
A lot of them have. There's a whole bunch. And as being a sergeant, it's different than investigations. When you're a cop, when you're brand new, you're learning the job, etc. And there's two paths that you could take for the most part. And one is to stay in patrol, where it's boots on the ground and you're going, you're answering 911 calls all night for the most part,
Mhm.
or, calls for service. Or you can go into investigations, and that's, the detective route, where you respond to a crime after the fact. You're not doing proactive policing. You're
Sure.
investigating, whatever happened. And as a sergeant and as a cop, you know, you just go through so many, it gets blurred.
Yeah.
A detective might be working, they say they catch a homicide. That's what they're doing that night.
Mhm.
Whereas like I'll catch a homicide. I might be on it for an hour. I might be on it for, I think the longest I worked was 23 hours on a homicide. So yeah, yeah. But yes, I've had some very interesting cases in both realms, or things that have stuck in my head. And I mean, I'll try to stay away from the most horrific, but some of the interesting ones, the squad area that I was working by myself one night, had a hospital. And hospitals are just repositories of just just crazy stuff, in the
Yeah.
middle of the night, in a big city, USA, it's just crazyville. So I get a call. It's like, yeah, meet the security guard at St. Mary's. And I'm like, all right, they have a DOE, which is a dead body. And I'm like,
Yep.
oh, that's no big surprise. There's a lot of dead people at hospitals. So I cruise
Yep.
over there, and I know this kid, he wants to be a cop, and he was just, he was on the ball. He was just a really good kid. I enjoyed interacting with him. He was probably like 20, 18, 19, 20, something like that. And he was
Sure.
going to school, and, hey, Pat, how are you? And, hey, Mike, how are you doing? Blah, blah, blah. And he said, this is weird. And I'm like, okay, give it to me. And he says, well, there's a dead body in the ER right now. And there's this guy that drove her here. And I'm like, okay. Usually it's a dump job. What they'll do is they'll drive up to the ER, open the door, dump the body, and then take off because they've got
Okay.
warrants, or maybe they were a part of this somehow. So they don't
Sure.
want anything to do with the cops because they know that the hospital is required to call the cops,
Yep.
in an instance like that. So I'm like, okay. And he said, this guy is really shook. He was an older white guy, probably about in his mid 60s, and kind of frumpy. And I'm like, and that's his vehicle over there. And he shows me, and it's a little pickup truck with like a camper thing on top, just a
Okay.
small one. And
Yeah.
I'm like, okay, that's interesting. Whatever. So the doctor comes out, and I said, make sure he doesn't go anywhere. Okay. And I'm like, okay, thanks. So the doctor's like, you want to see the body? I'm like, sure. So we go in the ER, in one of the rooms, and it was a Native American female, probably about 30 years old. And I can see her face, and she had
Yeah.
2 holes in her chest. And I'm looking at the doc, and I'm like, was she shot? And he says, I don't know. He said, here's the thing. We took an x-ray, and there's nothing metallic in her chest,
Hmm.
and there's no exit wound. And I'm like,
Hmm.
that's weird. Because usually, if you shoot somebody, it's almost like a perfect circle, depending on the size of the bullet going in, and then,
Mm-hmm.
blasts out, or it ricochets inside and does all kinds of, crazy stuff.
Yeah. Yeah.
But if you take an x-ray, you can find it. Like I said, it's metallic. And it's like, okay. He says, this one's got me stumped. I said, obviously she's dead. And, we were so busy that night. The whole incident happened like maybe almost 2 hours because I was at a shooting before that.
Mm-hmm.
And I was the only one that was available. And I'm like, all right. I said, well, anything else? He says, no, I'm stumped. I'm like, all right. So I go back to the guy, and by now I had already called the homicide unit, and they responded in about a half hour. So that's another thing. Like, there's so many things on TV and movies that are so wrong about all this, because it's like instantly there's this like team of homicide detectives that poof come out of nowhere. It's like,
Yeah.
no, it doesn't work like that. It take some places, like especially smaller jurisdictions, they got to wake people up, for
Yeah.
something like that. It takes a while. I was lucky enough where I worked, they had a 24/7 homicide unit. So
Okay.
they were always working. So that was nice. And so anyways, they come, and I said, you know what? I really didn't talk to this guy yet. I got his name, and I ran him. He's got like no warrants and zero criminal history, which is unique where I used to work.
Yeah.
And they're like, okay. So we're like, dude, what's up? What happened? He said, well, I was at the bar, and this girl started chatting me up, and things were going really good. And we're like, okay, she's like in her early 30s, and she was very attractive, and he's kind of like this frumpy old guy. And we're like, okay, maybe she's
Yeah.
a prostitute. And, I ran the dead person, and she had been arrested for prostitution a couple of times, but that was a while ago. So we're like, maybe, that's it's kind of a maybe, but she wasn't like a
Mm-hmm.
hardcore criminal or anything like that. And it's like, all right. So I said, so go on, tell us what happened. He said, well, she said that she was going to go home with me that night. Now, we didn't know if this was a business transaction or if this was just, whatever.
Yep.
And he's like, okay. And I said, what happened next? He said, well, she said that she wanted to go to her house to pick up some toiletries, and, like in a change of clothes. I'm like, all right. And he's thinking, this is the best night of my life. This is going to be super awesome.
Yep.
And he drops her off in a very not nice part of town,
Yep.
also within my district. And 5 minutes later, he hears a commotion in the house. He stayed in his truck, and lo and behold, this poor woman is like tumbling ass over tea kettle down the stairs. And he's like, "What the hell?" And I'm like, and then, he put her in the truck and drove her to the hospital. And he said, "Here I am." And he still didn't know that she was dead.
Oh,
The
no.
doc is like, "Yeah, she was dead before she got here. We tried to, jumpstart her, but there's some things there's no saving." And I'm like,
Yeah.
"Okay."
Yeah.
He explained to me, whatever it was punctured the sac around her heart, and she more or less bled out inside, and the heart just couldn't beat. And she was
Sure.
without oxygen and whatever for way too long. She expired. So we're like, "Could you take us to this house? Do you remember where it is?" He says, "Yeah, I sure do." And I was like, "All right,
Okay.
what could go wrong?" Yeah, I was like, "All right."
Yeah.
So I put him in my car, and two detectives follow me, and he said, "That's the house right there." And I'm like, "Do you know who's inside?" He said, "No, I didn't go inside. I just saw her, going down the stairs in front of the house." And I'm like, "All right." So me and the two detectives go up there, and I knock on the door, and there's a very large woman answers it, and she said, "What do you want?" And we're like, "Hmm. Hey, does, whatever her name is, I don't remember her name. Does she live here?" And you just said, "Yeah, she stays here." And she said, "That's right." She said, "Yeah, we got into it." And it's like, "It ain't like I killed the bitch." That was her exact words. And we
Oh,
all
no.
looked at each other, and it was just that moment of realization. You could see it in her eyes. It was like, I think I just did kill her. What it was is
Oh my
she was living with this woman romantically. They were
god.
partners,
Okay.
and she wasn't too pleased that she was going to be spending the night with a dude.
Okay. Yeah.
So they got into it, and she stabbed her with a barbecue fork.
Oh
The barbecue fork was still in the sink. We walked in the house,
my
and I could
god.
see it, and there was still blood on the tips. And
Oh
I'm
my
like, "No
god.
way.
Oh my god.
Wow, it doesn't get any simpler than this." I'm like, "Holy schlitz. This is crazy." So, it doesn't take Sherlock Holmes to solve a lot of these crimes. Of course, Hollywood and whatever, it makes for good TV or a good movie to have these interesting plot twists and all this other cool
Yep.
stuff. But a lot of times it was like, "Yeah, I didn't kill the bitch." "Yeah, you sure did." And then it all
Yeah.
made sense to me. I'm looking at this barbecue fork, like the space in it. And I'm like, "Those are the two holes that are in her chest." And I'm like, "Holy cow." She admitted the whole thing. That was the end of it.
That's crazy.
Yeah, but again, it's just night after night, I mean, some nights it was slow or whatever, and then everything happens all at once, and you get something like that, and you're like, "Wow, that I didn't see that coming."
I don't think
That's
she did
weird.
either, but yeah.
No, unfortunately.
Let's go back to your books.
Okay.
So, what kind of got you interested in, like, starting to write books?
Well, I'm a huge fan of the saying, "Dig the well before you're thirsty." And it's like I
Okay.
had the luxury of knowing that, hey, after 25 years, I'm popping smoke and I'm gone. I'm history. So so I'm like, okay, but I still have to do something.
Yep.
I'll be 55 years old. It's not like I'm 85, and I started thinking about this when I had 20 years on the job, and I'm like, "Ah, shoot, what am I gonna do?" And I'm thinking, and like I said before, I used to sell cars. And what I
Mhm.
did was I helped a lot of people, family and friends through the years buy cars. It's a
Mhm.
stressful situation. Nobody likes going to buy a car. The whole
No.
bartering system and going back and forth and all that. And I used to do that. So I helped a lot of people, and finally I forget who it was. They're like, "You should write a book on like how to help people buy cars." I'm like, "Hmm, okay." So through a weird at first I thought I had an agent, things were gonna be honky dory, and that quickly went to an end. And this is at the time that self-publishing was just coming out, where you
Sure.
could write a book and throw it up on Amazon. And we called it the Kindle Gold Rush. It
Yep.
was
Yep.
it was a free for all at first.
Yep.
It was really cool. So I'm like, yeah, you know what? If I sell one, great. I had a crappy cover. I wrote it under a pen name. I was like, I never wore plaid. Insider Secrets from a Former Car Salesperson by Joel Gray. I just, yeah, because I would have to get department approval for something like that, and I didn't
Oh,
want to
sure.
go through all that, so I'm just like, no, I'm just going to do it on the down low, and whatever I make, I make. And sure enough, I mean, the first year, I mean, I didn't do great. I probably sold about maybe 500 books, somewhere in that ballpark. I mean, it's still a decent amount, and
Yeah.
I'm like, that's interesting. And then a buddy of mine that was also a sergeant, he liked working inside because he was working on his doctorate. He was doing his dissertation, and he's like, I'm so sick of writing this freaking dissertation. And he wrote a post apocalyptic book. And I'm like, and it wasn't that great. And it wasn't edited. The cover wasn't great. And he made a boatload of cash on it. And I'm just like, well, I think I'll do that, and mine
Yeah.
flopped. It didn't go anywhere, of course. And, the subsequent books that he wrote after that really didn't do a whole lot. He just hit it at the right time. It was great timing.
Yep.
And, but I started listening to podcasts, the self-publishing shows, Johnny, Sean, and Dave, and then the Creative Pen, Joanna Penn. Those were the first couple that I started listening to, and I'm like, wow, it seems like you could make money. So,
Mhm.
I published a couple more books. I started going to book conferences, and lo and behold, like the magic at any of these conferences happen in between the sessions, at the
Yep.
bar, that kind of thing. The first one I went to was 20 books to 50K in Vegas.
Okay.
And it was a casino off the strip that was kind of dumpy or whatever, but it was fine for what we
Mhm.
needed. And I met some people there that know a lot more about this stuff than I did. I was still a cop, and people were coming up to me and was like, "Hey, you're that cop guy, right?" And I'm like, "I'm not wearing a t-shirt that say there's no sign on me or a sandwich board," but they were super nice. They were just like, "Hey, would you need a warrant to do this? If my detective in this story was doing this, would this happen?"
Oh, sure,
etc.
sure.
So at the time, right before all that, I went through a icky divorce, and I wrote a book about that under a pen name, more like just for self-help for guys going through
Mhm.
divorces. And unfortunately, I didn't do my due diligence and realized that a lot of guys don't read all that much, and especially when they're going through this. I sold more of that book to more women than I did men. And there was a couple people at these conferences that were really plugged into self-publishing. They were doing really well, that kind of helped me out with that book. And like I said before, all these people are asking me these police questions. So finally, somebody that knows a lot more about this stuff than I do, again, it's like, you should write some books helping authors with their police questions. I'm like, okay. So I did. I wrote two books, Cops and Writers, it's called. And it was, like the first book is The Academy to the Street. It gives the nuts and bolts of, how you become a police officer, what, a pseudo-typical day looks like, coming out, what the training is like, the equipment, just to give you a feel for what's it like to be a cop. And then the
Sure.
second book was Crime Scenes and Investigations. Okay, you go to the homicide. Okay, what happens? How do you investigate, from the worst, a homicide, to, like a barking dog, because cops get all of that.
Yep.
And, so I wrote those two books, and they did really well. And I'm like, and to get them going, what I did was I started a podcast. First,
Mhm.
I tried to be on as many podcasts as I could to be a
Sure.
guest, and I'm thinking to myself, I could do this. And this
Mhm.
is fun. I enjoy talking to people. I enjoy this kind of thing. And, being behind the mic, I get a big kick out of it, because way back when, my brother was a DJ, and I would help him, and
Okay.
I would take some of his shifts. So I would DJ, and I thought it
Mhm.
was just a blast. So, it wasn't that imposing to me or anything like that. And I thought, yeah, I could do that. So to promote the books, I started a podcast, and then I started a Facebook group, same thing, Cops and Writers. And the Facebook group blew up. There's like 7,500 people in that Facebook group right now, from literally all over the world, that help writers with
Wow.
their police questions.
That's
And
awesome.
the podcast that blew up. It started just, I don't want to say as a lark, but it was just, I didn't have a whole lot of expectations for it, but it kind
Sure.
of grew its own legs. And
Mhm.
all of a sudden I'm like, oh, okay, this is almost like a job. I'm really busy now.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's how it all evolved.
So I guess kind of piggybacking off of that, do you have any particular thoughts or feelings on how true crime podcasts, I'm not saying all of them, but
Mhm.
how some of them report their cases, given that not all of them know kind of the nuts and bolts that go into police work and how they report on the cases. Like, as someone who was a police officer, what is it like listening to true crime podcasts from people that obviously weren't have are not or have not been police
Well,
officers?
it's like anything else, the quality can differ by the show.
Mhm.
There's some that, man, it's like a Hollywood production. They've got
Yeah.
music, they've got actors, it's like, bum bum bum. It's the whole,
Yep.
and it's neat. I admire that because I know the amount of work that goes into it. That's
Sure.
not easy. So
Yeah.
I admire any artist that's trying to put some kind of content out there because it ain't easy.
Mm-mm.
That's tough. There's a lot of hours of editing and putting all this together, and yeah, it's not simple or easy. Then there's the true crime, podcasts or shows where you have for like retired people like me that were in law enforcement, and some of
Mhm.
them are better than others. I'll just say that where
Mhm.
some of them make it entertaining. If
Yep.
you can't make light of somebody getting killed, but
Yeah.
if it's all doom and gloom and real stoic and you just talk like a monotone, blah blah blah,
Yep.
you're
Yep.
gonna lose your audience. You got no matter what you're doing, you have to have some kind of fun doing
Yep.
what you're doing. I'm a huge believer in that. And for cops, it was very, very dark humor, and that was a coping mechanism. Of
Yep.
course, we felt bad for the victims of crimes and their families, etc. But if you didn't have that sense of humor, you'd go nuts. You would
Yeah.
Bad things are gonna happen, man. So you gotta do something. So the same thing with true crime podcasts. There's some that they don't take themselves super seriously,
Mhm.
but they put out a quality show.
Yep.
And like I like yours. Yeah, I'm not just saying that, but you guys have fun. Yeah,
Yeah.
and who doesn't like having fun, for God's sakes? It's like
Yeah.
you feel like you're hanging out with
Yep.
you. And
Yeah.
that's the best compliments I ever get for my show is like, I felt like I was just like in a bar with you having a drink or a coffee shop having a coffee with you. And I'm like,
Yep.
perfect. We got some chuckles. We learned something or whatever.
Yep.
It's like,
Yep.
and that's my whole aim. And when I go on a show, that's what I shoot for.
Yeah. That's exactly how I hope that our listeners feel when they listen to the show, that it's not that we're never doing anything where it's poking fun at the victims or making
Right.
light of whatever horrible thing happened to them. Because I
Yep.
mean, you've listened to the show. We cover some really dark things sometimes on the show, like
Sure.
horrible, like
Yep.
massacres and stuff. Like, it's not necessarily something where you'd be, like, chuckling the whole time, but we do
Right.
try to add brevity where you can, and
Yep.
try to,
Absolutely.
like, you do what you
Yeah.
can.
Absolutely. And I think you guys do a good job. It's hard to have a co-host, because you have to find that chemistry. There's
Yep,
some shows that can do it, and others that it's kind of awkward, or maybe
yep,
even overproduced, where you're like, boy, that's kind of over the top." You got to
yeah,
find that sweet spot,
yep.
and that's not an easy thing at all.
No, there aren't many people that I know that I've met through podcasting that I feel would be able to be a complement or a replacement to my sister. Like, I feel like
Right?
because we have that built-in rapport because
Yes,
we've
you
known each
do.
other our entire lives, you know?
Yeah, I think you know what the other one's thinking before they say it, and
Yeah,
you have fun with it, and it's the
yeah,
same thing with, guests. You're not gonna obviously have that kind of chemistry, but it is nice to have somebody that actually has a sense of humor and can,
yep.
make fun of themselves and, all that kind of stuff that isn't, like, super serious.
Exactly. To kind of go back to your show, how do you find the guests that you have on your show? Like, is it something where you just do it through Podmatch, like kind of how we met each other? Or is it something where you reach out to people or they reach out to you? Like, how do you go about securing guests for your show?
C, all the above.
All of the above. I figured it was going to be that.
Yeah, but a lot of my guests are referrals.
Okay.
Where I'll get done talking to somebody, and one of the things that I do is I'll send them an email later, hey, thanks a lot for being on the show, whatever. most of my guests are referrals. Is there anybody you think would be a good fit?
Sure.
And
Sure.
sometimes it's really good, or I just have people that just cold email me. I
Hmm.
have my my email address on, the website, etc. And I think I say it when it's on the show notes. I know that, it's not hard to find me.
Yep.
And I'll have people that just cold email me, or I'll listen to a podcast myself and I'm like, boy, that would be a really good guest. So I'll cold
Hmm.
email them. But a
Yep.
lot of it, like I said, it's all the above, but a lot of it is people pitching me now,
Hmm.
or referrals like, hey, you know what? Obviously I know other people in the podcast biz that are doing similar things that I am doing, and we're friends. And it's like, hey, you know what? I think, this person would be a great match for you. And I'm like, hey, I've got two for you that would be dynamite.
Yep.
So I have a lot of fun doing it that way.
We've done like a little, probably a combination of all three as well. Like
Yeah,
I've had some really fun guests on the show that I never would have met had I not gotten referrals
right.
from somebody else who came on the show. I have publishers that will sometimes reach out and be like, "Hey,"
Yes. Yep. Absolutely.
and that's always like I view it as like a huge compliment to have like a
Oh yeah,
publisher reach
absolutely.
out to me, like
Yep.
this small time podcaster being like, "We want our author to be on your show," and I'm like, "Absolutely!" Like if they're a perfect fit, then yeah, no
Yes.
contest. Like please come on.
Absolutely.
And that's something too where I've met so many amazing authors just through that I never would have met any other way. So it's
And I would just give you the caveat that if somebody's listening, they have a podcast or they're thinking about a podcast, don't be afraid to reach for the stars. Some
yep.
people are really difficult, but I've had people on my show that I never thought I would get. I had Joe Kenda on.
Hmm.
He's Mr. True Crime. My wife is a huge fan of his, and he was such a nice guy. I said, "Hey, Joe." Yeah, after I got to know him, I said, "Could you? This is my wife's phone number. Could you leave a message for her? She'd get a kick out of that because she loves Joe Kenda, and all that true crime stuff." So he's like, "Ruth, this is Joe Kenda. I'm coming for you," and something like that. I'm like, "Oh my god." She was just laughing hysterically, but
That's
I just
awesome.
cold emailed him, and he's a nice guy, and we just hit it off. I
Hmm.
had Jack Carr on my show. I had Mark Cameron. He wrote the last 5 Tom Clancy novels. I've had some like
That's
big
awesome.
names, and some people that were just really cool that I heard on like really big podcasts, and I'm like, "Oh, I'll give it a shot. Why not?" I had
Yeah.
Jack Barsky. He was a former KGB agent
Oh
that
wow. Yeah.
he was an advisor for the Americans that was on Amazon Prime. And they gave him like a little
Okay.
bit parties, and I got to meet him. That's the cool thing about
Hmm.
podcasting. I was in Atlanta helping my daughter move, and I knew he lived outside of Atlanta. I said, "Hey, Jack." I still had his phone number. I said, "Hey, I'm in Atlanta. Let's get lunch." He says, "We go to Cracker Barrel. I love Cracker Barrel." And I'm just like, and here's a guy who was literally a spy for the Soviet Union. And we're just having a good old time at Cracker Barrel. And I'm just like, none of this would have been possible if it wasn't for podcasts.
Hmm.
It's a
Yeah.
brave new world, man. I think it's awesome.
I do too. It's crazy. Like some of my best friends I met through podcasting, and I don't
Yeah,
know where I would be right now without them. So it's crazy. So yeah, I say the same thing to some of my friends who are thinking about starting their own show, and I'm like, the worst thing that can happen is that people don't listen. But as long as
absolutely.
you're passionate about something, do it.
Yeah.
Just give it a shot.
And I think that really comes over the mic too. If they don't see it, they can genuinely tell if you're excited about it.
Yep.
It's like, people ask me, how do I become a good guest, et cetera. It's like, well, first off, or a good, podcaster. It's like, be excited about what you're doing.
Yep.
Give them your 100% attention. You
Yep.
know, be prepared if you can,
Yep.
and just have fun with it. Relax, have fun, and just have a good conversation.
That's basically what I say to people as well. When they're
Yep.
I've had a lot of people on my show who I invited them on and that it was their first time ever being interviewed by somebody else.
Yep, me too.
And they were like, "I have no idea what to say, what to do, and I'm like, "Just do what's natural." Like, we're just having a conversation. I'm just a human. Like, I'm just another human
Right,
being
exactly.
who's
Yeah,
just
it's so funny. It's both humbling and amusing to me that, I was at Killer Nashville back in August,
Mhm.
and I had these people coming up to me, complete strangers. It was like, "I love your podcast." And I'm like, "Who are you?"
Yeah.
It's like, "Could I have a picture with you?" And I'm like, "Sure." And I'm thinking to myself, this is like the twilight zone for me right now. It's like, you
Yep.
really helped me. Your group really helped me. Your podcast really helped me. And I'm just like, good. I couldn't be happier that, that you found some value out of it, because I tell you what, and you might feel the same or not, but you're behind the microphone and you're like, is anybody listening to me? I mean, you see the
Yeah.
numbers and stuff, but you're just
Yeah.
kind of like, hmm. And then when you get that validation, even just a little bit, you're like, wow, this is really cool.
I think the most complimentary comments that I get, or the things that I find the most complimentary, will be if someone reaches out, having listened to the show, to say, "Hey, I have lived in wherever the area is my entire life, and you covered something on your show that I have never heard of before
Wow, that's totally cool.
that took place in my backyard. So I
Wow.
learned something about where I
Yeah.
lived from your show." And that is the highest praise that I could get from anybody, knowing that, like, someone learned something wholly new from a place that they've lived forever from my little show. Like, that's a huge compliment to me.
And also what that shows you too is they took the time out of their day to actually interact with you like that. To me, that's huge. It
Yep.
really is. If somebody takes the time to shoot off an email or, a Facebook thing or whatever, I'm like, wow, thank you so much.
Yep.
That means the world to me. It really does.
I feel the
You know,
exact
and
same way.
and not to be too corny, but well, I wouldn't say corny. I had a gentleman on my show. His name is Dr. BJ Miller. He ran Zen Hospice in San Francisco for years, and they did a special on it on Netflix.
Okay.
And this guy is a triple amputee,
Oh, wow.
and that's before he went to medical school. He drives a motorcycle, a bicycle, and he's a doctor. He lost both legs below the knees and his left arm below the elbow. He was electrocuted in a freak accident when he was in
Oh,
college.
God. God.
And his TED Talk is like one of the most watched and downloaded TED Talks, like out of all of them. He's
Mhm.
such an interesting human. I loved talking to him. But the reason why I'm talking about this is I had two people reach out to me. And it's like, you know what? My mom, my whoever, my dad, they were in hospice. And this episode meant so much to me. Thank you. And it's not solicited. And you're just like, I almost started crying. I'm like,
Yeah.
wow. You never know how you're going to affect somebody. Even if you give them a chuckle and they're having a bad day or whatever, hey, more power to you.
Yeah, exactly. If I can make somebody laugh and help them learn something totally
Right.
new, that's a slam dunk.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Tell us about the different books that you've written.
One of the great things about the podcast is you get to meet people. And Michael Anderley from LMBPN was on my show. It's a mid-list, like hybrid publishing company. And,
Sure.
we get off the mic afterwards and he's like, how would you like to write some crime fiction for me? So I got a 6-book deal with him. So I
That's
wrote 4
awesome.
books there called Brew City Blues. It's kind of along the lines of Hill Street Blues, but set in Milwaukee in modern times.
Okay.
And it was almost autobiographical. Obviously I had to jazz up some stuff to, make it more readable, etc. But it starts out with, a younger cop and just his transition through the police department
Sure.
and all the different stuff that he's done. So, and then my latest book, number 10, is called The Good Collar.
Okay.
And were you a fan of Dexter, or do you remember Dexter?
Yes. 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 Yeah.
Okay. Imagine Dexter not being a serologist, which is the blood spatter expert, but being the police chaplain.
Oh. Oh, weird. Okay. All
Yep,
right.
that's my book. That's coming out, I'm hoping, a couple of days after Christmas.
Okay. Cool.
So, I had a ton of fun writing this one, where it's dark. I mean, it's dark, but the main premise is, it starts out with this young by young, like 30-year-old Milwaukee police sergeant. He's in the gang unit. He's got a great assignment. Him and his wife were trying to have a family, and she surprises him. She takes him out for dinner and she announces, "Hey, I'm pregnant." They've been trying forever and they're on top of the world. They're walking out of the restaurant and they get jumped. So she dies. He's in a coma I put him in a coma for about a month. So he would miss the burial, etc. He starts going down the tubes. He turns into a raging alcoholic. And the police chaplain and his friends are trying to pull him back up. The police chief wants to fire him because he killed 4 people during this attack. I mean, he almost died too. And his
Sure.
wife died. But, the optics weren't very good. I don't get into politics that much, but, it didn't look so great, even though it was justified. And he's drunk and he gets into a situation when he's drunk, and that's enough for the chief to fire him.
Sure.
So to save his pension, the police chaplain is like, you know what? He went to a Catholic seminary. He had to quit that because when he was in high school, the seminary was high school. He had to quit because his dad died of cancer, so he had to help out with the family butcher shop. He's good with
Sure.
knives.
Yep.
And so what happens is, it's like, okay, you got the religious background. I'm going to make you the next police chaplain because I got some dirt on the chief. And,
Okay.
he more or less has to do what I tell him to do. I don't push it, but I'm going to save your pension. But you're going to be the new police chaplain because he's dying of cancer. He's on his way out. But what the main character doesn't realize is this police chaplain is a vigilante serial killer. He rights all the
Okay.
wrongs. Anybody that slips through the criminal justice system, like on a technicality or whatever, he takes care of business. But he's getting old and he's sick. So
Yep.
it's almost like an Obi-Wan Luke thing, where
Sure.
he's got to teach him the ropes. And of course the subplot is he's going after the 2 guys that killed his wife. And
Gotcha.
I've got some good side characters too. Like his sister is a nun and she's good looking. So his sister's a sister, and his guys are pigs. So, they're making lewd comments
Yep.
about his sister, the nun. It's like, excuse me, she's married to God, not a good idea,
Yep.
guys. And she's got a real potty mouth, for a nun. I have all kinds of fun with this book. I just had a blast writing it.
That sounds really cool.
So The Good Collar.
Well, I would like to thank Patrick for joining me today. And before we go, can you please tell our listeners where they can find you on social media and when new episodes of your podcast come out?
Social media, I'm on Facebook under Cops and Writers, the Cops and Writers Facebook group. Just a couple of quick questions you have to answer, and I'll let you in to make sure you're a human being. As far as the podcast goes, it goes out every Sunday at 12 a.m. So at the stroke of midnight on Saturday night, my next episode will come out.
Awesome.
And every now and then I have some bonus episodes I just throw in there just for funsies.
Sounds good. And do you want to mention your upcoming book one more time?
The Good Collar, the Michael Quinn Vigilante series.
And on that note, as always, I'm Lindsay, and I'll see you next time with another tale as old as crime.